Good evening. My name is Anna Agresti, and I'm a student research fellow with the Institute. After our speaker tonight, there'll be a short Q&A so you guys can line up behind the microphones in the aisles. All Abby Johnson ever wanted to do was help women. Her passion surrounding a woman's right to choose even led her to become a spokesperson for Planned Parenthood, fighting to enact legislation for the cause she so deeply believed in. However, she experienced a change of heart while participating in an ultrasound-guided abortion procedure. Today, Abby travels across the globe sharing her story, educating the public on pro-life issues, advocating for the unborn, and reaching out to abortion clinic staff who still work in the industry. The media continues to be interested in Abby's story, as well as her continued efforts to advocate for the unborn and help clinic workers escape the abortion industry. She's a frequently requested guest on Fox News and a variety of other shows. She is also the author of the nationally best-selling book, Unplanned, which chronicles both her experiences within Planned Parenthood and her dramatic exit. The movie adaptation, Unplanned the Movie, was released in the spring of 2019. Please join me in welcoming Abby Johnson.
Well, I am from Texas, so howdy. It's so good to be here with all of you. It's beautiful up here. I'm really honored. I live outside of Austin, Texas, which is, it's the weird part of Texas, but somebody's got to be there fighting for normalcy. So I guess that's me. Anyway, it's good to be here with all of you. I do live outside of Austin with my husband, Doug, and our 8 children. So I know, it's a lot. I know. I do know how it happens, so you don't have to ask me afterward. We have a TV and all of it. Let's see. Our oldest daughter is 16, and then we had 4 boys in a row. They are 10, 9, 8, and 8. I know, I was there. And then they're not, the 8 and 8-year-olds are not twins. They're everybody thinks they're not twins. They're actually 6 months apart. Our first set in those 2 boys, they're 11 months apart. And then the second 2 are 14 months apart, and then those last 2 are 6 months apart. I move fast, not quite that fast. The second 8-year-old was actually gifted to us through open adoption. So that was how that happened. And then we told God we would have 1 more, and then he gave us twin girls. So they're 5. And then we had 1 more little boy, Fulton, and he's 3, and we're done. So I say, although I've said that before, I'm kind of done telling things like that to God. Though I'm kind of done, like saying, "Okay, God, I'm like done. I'm never going to do this again." Because I also said before, like I'm never going to drive a minivan, and now I drive a 12-passenger van. So I'm kind of, I try not to give those ultimatums to God anymore. But anyway, it's fun. It's fun having all of those kids. It's loud. It's very noisy. It's kind of gross. Everything smells like pee in my house. So, it's fine. So I want to talk. I think most of you probably know my story. Probably a lot of you have probably seen Unplanned. Have you seen Unplanned or read the book or something? Yeah. So a lot of you have. I'll just kind of briefly go through my story because I want to talk to you. Well, first of all, I want to take a lot of time to answer your questions because that's my favorite thing in the world is to answer questions from the audience. But I also kind of want to talk to you about, what's happening now, right? Roe's been overturned, and so now what? So I worked at Planned Parenthood for 8 years. I got involved with Planned Parenthood as a college kid. I grew up in a very conservative home, Southern Baptist kid, church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, youth camps, youth group, youth choir, all of that. I remember I gave my heart to the Lord whenever I was 8 years old. I walked down a center aisle that looked kind of like this. My parents did not know I was doing that. I surprised the heck out of them. The first of many things I would surprise my parents with. And you know, I remember that moment. I remember that day. I remember feeling that in my heart. It's, you know, now's the time. Now's the day. And I was, you know, baptized in 1988, and actually with my dad. And it was, you know, Easter Sunday morning. I remember it. I remember it just like it was yesterday. I grew up loving the Lord, serving Him. I remember my parents saying something about abortion when I was growing up. I remember them saying that abortion was wrong. It wasn't something that we believed in. But I grew up in South Louisiana. We did not have an abortion clinic anywhere near us. Abortion was not something that was talked about a lot. We certainly did not talk about it in our church. We did not talk about it in the youth group. You know, at that time, you know, in the 80s, you know, abortion was not something that was talked about a lot. It was not in the media like it is today. Anything involving sexuality, abortion, homosexuality, all of that, it was considered taboo. Anything that involved sexuality was something that you just really did not talk about. And abortion fit into that category. You know, my parents did not really talk to me about sex. I remember in 3rd grade, my mom came home. We came home from school, and my mom said, "Abby, I need to talk to you about something." And she sat me down in the living room with a pop-up book about sex. And I was so embarrassed that she and my dad could do something like that. I ran out of the room crying, and we never talked about it again. And that was that. And so we never discussed anything like abortion. And so, you know, we didn't sit around the dinner table and talk about controversial issues in my house. My parents, you know, they just kind of thought, well, you know, Abby's been taught the biblical pathway to marriage, and so as long as she follows that, abortion is never going to be on the table, so we don't need to talk about something so disturbing with our little girl. And so we didn't. And at that time, abortion wasn't in the news. It wasn't in the media. Nobody at that time was standing up at a podium and shouting their abortion. People still had a filter at that time. So not everything that came into the head came right out of the mouth. And people weren't talking about their indiscretions proudly. People were not shouting their sins. People weren't proud about things like that. People weren't proud about the fact that they had murdered their children. They didn't wear it as a badge of honor, not like they do today. And so I went to college very ignorant, in the purest definition of that word, very ignorant about abortion. Very ignorant, really, about pregnancy. I mean, I knew how it happened, but I didn't know what a pregnancy center was. I didn't know what to do in an unplanned pregnancy. I didn't know anything about adoption. I just knew really nothing. I was very naive. I was a pretty sheltered kid. So I go to college, public university, Texas A&M, and I go to college. I'm walking around campus one day, and I meet a woman who's with Planned Parenthood, and she's trying to recruit college kids to be patient, certainly, but also to volunteer and to eventually become staff members at the school, at the clinic. And I didn't know anything about Planned Parenthood. I had never even heard the name Planned Parenthood before. So this was new to me. And she starts talking to me about, all the wonderful services that Planned Parenthood provides. And she starts telling me that, without Planned Parenthood, low-income women would have nowhere else to go for health care. And I thought, well, that's so generous. What a wonderful benefactor to the masses, that they would be so charitable. Look, I didn't grow up low income. I grew up very middle class. Very middle class background. I've always had health insurance, health care whenever I needed it. So what do I know? What do I know about the plight of a woman who's low income and doesn't have health care at her disposal? I don't know. So when she tells me this, I believe her. I didn't know it was just a big lie. I didn't know that, in our country, there's fewer than 600 Planned Parenthood facilities, but there's over 13,000 federally qualified health centers that provide comprehensive health care for men, women, and children at low or no cost. I didn't know that. Why would I know that? She started talking to me about abortion. She asked me what I thought about abortion. I told her, I was raised pro-life. She said, that's great. She said, pro-lifers are good people. She said, they just don't see the big picture. They don't understand that without access to safe and legal abortion, women are going to go where? Back alleys. I thought, well, that sounds terrible. That's scary. She said, these pro-lifers are just trying to take away the rights of women. And, first, they're going to take away our rights to do with our bodies what we will. And then what? Then they're going to take away what? Our right to vote? And then what? What's next? They're going to tell us, well, we can't wear pants anymore, just skirts all the time. And I thought, well, I like pants. So I want that. So I signed up immediately, What I didn't know is that what took place in these supposed back alley abortion facilities is actually no different than what's taking place today inside of supposed safe and legal abortion facilities. Women are still dying today inside of legal abortion facilities. Now, you don't hear about them. There's no hashtags, justice for them. No riots in the streets for them. No protests outside of the facilities that let them die and bleed to death on these abortion clinic tables. Probably don't know their names. Probably never heard of them. But they're dying. Almost all of them black women. No justice for them. Nobody's burning down downtown St. Louis for those women. What I didn't know is that inside of almost every abortion facility, legal abortion facility in our country, you will find a long list of health violations, unsterilized instrumentation. These are the instruments that are being put inside of women's bodies, being used woman to woman. unreported statutory rape. 13, 14-year-old girls coming in year after year. The same girls coming in pregnant year after year. What is that indicative of? Sex trafficking. Unreported. The abortion industry is a safe haven for abusers. It is a safe haven for traffickers. They know it. They don't care. They know these girls are being trafficked. They don't care. In a training one time about sex trafficking, a woman from a sex trafficking organization was sitting in a room full of Planned Parenthood employees, giving them tips and strategies on how to identify a victim of sex trafficking. And one of the Planned Parenthood nurses looked back at this woman from the sex trafficking group, organization, and said, "Why would we even try to help them? They probably like it." All things I didn't know about the organization that I would soon then go to work for and champion for 8 years. I went to work for Planned Parenthood. I was naive. I was easily influenced. I believed I went there to help women. I believed at the time that I was going to work at an organization that was trying to keep abortion safe, legal, and rare. That was the talking point at the time. Everybody said it. Everybody said it. Politicians said it. The media said it. Presidents said it. I mean, they wouldn't lie. So it had to be true. And, you know, everybody was standing up on podiums and saying, we want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. It was such a convincing talking point that you even had moderate Republicans and independents believing that that was a satisfactory response to abortion. Because nobody wants abortion to be safe, legal, and plentiful. But at the end of the day, that talking point of abortion being safe, legal, and rare doesn't even make sense, because if there's nothing wrong with abortion, if there's nothing wrong with the product you're selling, why don't you want that product to be available everywhere, anywhere? Why wouldn't you want that product to be plentiful? If I'm a car salesman and I'm selling an excellent product, why don't I want everybody to buy my car? Of course I do. So even their own talking points don't make sense. They didn't at the time. But, you know, it tickles the ears. It sounded all right. Safe, legal, and rare. Everybody bought into it. Lots of Republicans bought into it. Independents bought into it. So you go along with it. 2007, the whole industry changed. We had to change because we realized that the message we were giving to women coming in for abortions wasn't working anymore. We were telling women that, you know, oh, you're just pregnant with tissue. Oh, it's just a mass of cells, whatever. We were telling women these lies, and it wasn't working because about 60% of women who were coming in to have abortions already had had children. They had babies at home. They had already gone through the delivery process. They had had prenatal exams. They had had ultrasounds. They knew they weren't pregnant with a blob of tissue. They knew they were pregnant with a baby. In fact, every single woman that came into our facility to have an abortion said that she was having an abortion of a baby. She identified her pregnancy as a baby, every single woman. Every single one of them. No woman ever called her pregnancy a fetus that came into our abortion facility, ever. She never said it was an embryo. She never said it was a fetus. She never said it was a blastocyst. Every single woman who came in to have an abortion always said it was a baby. They knew it was a baby. So we had to recognize at the federation level, at PPFA, we had to recognize that what we were saying to these women was not resonating with them, because they were coming back to us and saying, well, I mean, but is my baby going to feel any pain? They recognized that this was not just a mass of cells, this was a baby. So our answers were falling flat. So the whole movement changed. PPFA changed, they changed their language, they changed the rhetoric, they changed the talking points. And now we were instructed to tell these women who were coming in to have abortions that the reason that they were having an abortion, that the reason women had abortions, women chose abortions because they cared about themselves, their current families, and their future families. All of a sudden, we were selling to the public this idea that abortion was an act of altruism, that abortion was an act of love, that killing your baby was the loving decision, that having an abortion was an act of compassion. And honestly, I kind of thought that was crazy. When they first rolled it out, I was like, is that really going to work? Is this really going to make sense? And you know what it did? To all the women who were coming in, we're giving them these talking points, and we're like, well, you know, we know you're doing this because you care about yourself, your current family, and your future family. And these women would look at us, and they would go, yes, that's exactly why I'm doing this, because I care. I'm having an abortion because I want what's best for this baby. It worked. And these women felt more confident than ever about going into that procedure room and having an abortion. It was amazing. And everybody ate it up. The media ate it up. And the narrative suddenly changed. Abortion was an act of compassion. Killing was compassionate. That then translated to other areas of vulnerable people. The disability community. Well, let's just kill them. Because killing them is an act of compassion. I have a friend who had a child who was profoundly disabled. And up until the age of 5 years old, every doctor they saw at every hospital encouraged them to starve their child to death. As an act of compassion. It's compassionate to starve your child until they die. Well, it made sense for abortion. Certainly it makes sense here. You may have heard the country of Iceland a few years ago said that they had eradicated Down syndrome. No more Down syndrome in Iceland. What does that mean? Women aren't getting pregnant with babies that have Down syndrome anymore in Iceland? How did that happen? No, that's not what happened. Women are indeed still getting pregnant with babies diagnosed with Down syndrome. What it means is that they have effectively killed all of those babies in the womb before they are born. That is how they have eradicated Down syndrome. That sounds familiar to me. It sounds like eugenics. It sounds like eugenics because it is eugenics. It sounds very Hitler-esque to me. Because it is. What other population is vulnerable to this messaging? I know, the elderly. Euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide. Now we hear that messaging now sweeping across the country, because if you are suffering in any way, shape, or form, you don't even have to be terminal anymore in some states in the United States. If you're sad, if you don't like living, then that's fine. As an act of compassion, a doctor will kill you. Widespread murder in our country has now become an act of compassion, an act of altruism. That was introduced through the abortion industry in 2007. I watched it happen. But even that wasn't what made me leave. That wasn't what convinced me to leave. Because at that point, I was in the thick of it. I was in it. I was making a ton of money. And I thought, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. We're selling a product. Women are buying it. I didn't leave until I was actually asked to go in and assist in an ultrasound-guided abortion procedure. Now, let me be clear, ultrasounds are not typically used during an abortion procedure. We did use them before the abortion took place. We used them to verify how far along the woman was in the pregnancy so that we knew how much to charge her for the abortion. But then the ultrasound was rolled away. Abortions are typically done in a blind manner. The doctor has a suction tube. He inserts it. This is the first trimester abortion. He inserts it into her uterus. He blindly pokes around in her uterus until he fills a glass jar with blood and tissue, the body parts of the baby. That jar goes into a lab called the POC lab. POC stands for products of conception. That's the baby. Inside of the lab, the POC tech pieces that baby back together to ensure that all of the parts were removed from the uterus so that we make sure there's no infection, possible infection that will set in for the woman in her uterus because of retained products of conception. And then, and then that's it. The abortion's over. It takes about 5 minutes from start to finish. And it's all blind. There's no wonder there was such a high rate of uterine perforation, because the doctor can't see, he literally can't see what he's doing inside of the woman's body while he's performing surgery. So when we had a visiting physician come in from another clinic and he's explaining to me that in his practice he only uses an ultrasound during abortions because it's safer for women, that made sense to me. I go to my supervisor, I said, if this is safer for women, why isn't this a standard of care inside of the abortion industry? She comes back to me and says, well, yes, it is safer, but using an ultrasound inside of the abortion clinic room takes about an extra 3 minutes of time. We just simply don't have that time, because inside of an abortion clinic, inside of our clinic, you're trying to do anywhere between 40, 60 abortions a day. Time is money. So I accept that answer, but the doctor wants to show me what's actually happening inside the womb during an abortion. He thought it would be a good learning opportunity for me. I did learn something that day. I go in, I hold the ultrasound probe on the woman's abdomen. We visualize her uterus. The baby is 13 weeks along. And as he begins the abortion procedure, and I see the suction tube moving closer and closer to the side of the baby, it finally touches his side, and he jumps. The baby jumps. And I see the baby flailing his arms and legs as if he's trying to move away from that abortion instrument, but there's nowhere for him to go. The suction machine is turned on, and I watch this baby's body be ripped apart by the powerful suction in the womb. And I realized then, watching this innocent human being fight for its life, have the same exact fight or flight response that any of us in this room would have. I realized then at that moment that what I had witnessed on that ultrasound, what I had witnessed inside of that room was not choice. No choice had been given to that child in the womb. It was not justice. It was not reproductive justice. There was no justice for that child in the womb. And really no justice for that woman, because that woman had never even been given the opportunity to visualize her child on that ultrasound screen. She had never even been given proper informed consent. That is an injustice for that woman. There was no justice in that room that day, no justice in that clinic that day. It's not choice, it was not justice. It was certainly not health care. What I had witnessed that day in that room, on that ultrasound screen, was the intentional taking of an innocent life. And we have a word for that. And that is murder. That was what I had witnessed that day. And I knew with every part of my being that I could never be a part of that again. I would never be a part of that again. I ended up leaving Planned Parenthood. I did not want to do this. This is not what I thought I would be doing for the rest of my life. When I left Planned Parenthood, I was actually embarrassed that I'd ever been part of an industry like that. I was embarrassed that I'd ever done something that terrible. I started calculating, I realized over those 8 years I had been complicit. I had helped to facilitate over 22,000 abortions. That was devastating to me. It was terribly embarrassing. And I thought, I don't ever want to tell people what I've done. I don't ever want to talk about it. I just want to slink away. I just want to go do my own thing. I just want to get another job. I'm a therapist by education, so I thought I'll just be a therapist. I'll just go do my own thing. I don't ever want to talk about what I've done. But God had other plans, and Planned Parenthood's terrible, terrible public relations team also had other plans. When I quit, Planned Parenthood sued me. They tried to get a permanent gag order against me, and when they sued me, Planned Parenthood's PR team sent out a press release announcing to everyone that they were suing me, and that press release got picked up by the Associated Press. And that press release ignited an interest in the media, because then the media started to wonder, why are you trying to keep this woman quiet? What does she know that you don't want everyone else to know? We went to court. They obviously lost. And I've been sharing my story for the last 14 years. I've been sharing these details. I've been sharing these secrets, the things that the abortion industry does not want the public to know. Because when you are faced with the evil of abortion, when you are faced with something as evil as abortion, and when you know the truth about that evil, you must stand up and fight against it. You cannot be complicit. You cannot be apathetic. You must stand up and fight against it. You have to. We are compelled to do that at any cost. No matter what. No matter what daggers get thrown at us, no matter the arrows that are slung, it doesn't matter. Christ compels us to not cooperate with evil, but to fight against it. And abortion is evil. Abortion is demonic at its core. We have had a big victory in the United States. June 24th, 2022, a day I will never forget. Roe v. Wade was overturned in the United States, and it was a good day. But for a lot of states in the United States, this one included, it didn't do much. Things look the same. Things look the same on July 1st as they did on June 23rd. Really, nothing changed here in your beautiful state. Abortion clinics are still open. Babies are still being killed by the hundreds, the thousands every year. I guess Pennsylvania now recognizes the birth problem in your state, as now they are paying women to stay pregnant in the state of Pennsylvania. You've seen that, right? You haven't seen that? Yeah. You get pregnant now in the state of Pennsylvania, the state will pay you $250 to stay pregnant. You hadn't heard about that? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Your state tax dollars at work. Look it up. Not right now, not in the middle of my talk, but when I'm done, you can look it up. Why? Why would they do that? Because you have a plummeting birth problem in your state. We have a plummeting birth rate problem in our country. Why? Well, because we're killing all of our babies by abortion. We have a huge fertility rate problem in the United States. Abortion is the #1 killer in our country. Nobody wants to acknowledge it, but now we're paying women to stay pregnant. That's how bad it's gotten. Another country did that, Russia. Russia, where the average rate of abortions for a single woman, for one woman, not a single woman, but for one woman, 9 abortions. The average woman in Russia has 9 abortions. You think that's crazy. But I've met many, many women here in the United States who have had over 10, 12 abortions. I've met several women who have had over 15 abortions here in the United States. We had women in our clinic who had multiple charts because they had had 17, 18 abortions. You think it's crazy, but it's not crazy, and unfortunately, it's not uncommon. Abortion is the new form of birth control in our country. And why not? Half the states in our country will pay for a woman to use abortion as a form of birth control. Well, how do we fight against this? It seems bad. I mean, I'm giving you all bad news. It seems bad. And it is bad. I mean, killing our most vulnerable is bad. It is. And I could stand up here and tell you, but we have the victory because we have Jesus. And that's true. And that's a good Sunday school answer. But hear me when I say this. We do have the victory. But God wants every single one of us to participate daily in those victories. We can't just sit back as a body of Christ and go, oh, God, things are terrible. Good thing God's coming to the rescue one day. We cannot do that. Because every day that we sit back and we say, oh, this is so bad, this is doom and gloom, good thing God's coming one day. Every single day that we sit back and we're apathetic, every single day that we sit back, we're actually complicit in the killing. We must activate as a body of Christ. And that's going to look different for different people. For some of you, it may be going out and praying and holding vigil and being a sidewalk advocate in front of the places where abortion is actually happening. For some of you, it may be going down to your state capitol and lobbying and advocating for certain laws and legislation and whatever. Let me assure you, though, while I believe in legislation, while I believe in pro-life legislation, I believe the law as a teacher, let me just remind you, abortion is not happening in the halls of Congress. It is not happening in your state capitol. It's happening in our communities. It's happening down our streets. It's happening in these abortion facilities in our own communities to the women that we know, that we love, that we worship with. About 60% of women who have abortions are coming from our churches. So if you really want to end abortion, you've got to get your church activated. If you really want to make a difference in our culture, you've got to get the church involved. That's how abortion ends. Because at the end of the day, it's not those people over there having abortions. It's not that group of people over there. It's not, this unchurched group of people that are having abortions. These people that don't know the Lord. Let me tell you something. I've had 2 abortions in my life. And the Sundays before I had my 2 abortions, I sat in church. And the Sundays after I had my 2 abortions, I sat in church. When I worked at Planned Parenthood, I was a member of a church. And every Sunday that I worked at Planned Parenthood, I sat in a church. The bulk of women having abortions are not the unchurched. The bulk of the women having abortions are sinners, just like the rest of us, sitting in a church. You want to reach women in crisis pregnancies, you want to reach the hurting, reach inside your own church. That's how you change this culture. But you've got to get involved. You've got to get involved in your own communities. You've got to get involved in your own churches. You've got to start being the solution. You can't just sit around on Facebook and social media and complain about it. You've got to be that solution. Complaining gets you nowhere. Action does. We've got to be a people of action. Because while we sit around and we complain and there's inaction going on, babies die, women are hurting, and women live the rest of their lives with regret that they shouldn't have to live with, because the church should be out there being the church. We should be out there giving this message everywhere and anywhere we can, and we've got to stop worrying about who we're offending with the message of Christ. I don't care who I offend. I don't care if I offend any one of you in here. I don't care who I offend as long as I'm offending people with the truth of the gospel. Because at the end of my life, when I go to meet my Creator, I'm not going to be standing in front of any of you. I'm going to be standing in front of my Creator. And you know what I hope He says to me? Thanks for bringing so many with you. Thanks for packing this place up here. I don't think God cares about my social media presence. I don't think He's going to look at me and go, man, you did good getting 407,000 people on Facebook. He cares about our salvation. He cares about our eternal lives. And that's what we should care about in the pro-life movement too. It's not just about saving these babies, it's about saving eternal lives as well. Be a movement of action. And with that, I would love to answer any questions you have.
you want to ask a question, just come line up beside the mics here.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for coming and for your work. I'm nervous asking this question because it's somewhat controversial, but I was wondering if you could speak to the issue of hormonal birth control and its abortifacient properties. It's my understanding that hormonal birth control, the birth control pill, one of the ways that it works as a backup is by creating an inhospitable environment in the womb for a baby. And I find that Christians are not very aware of this issue and don't seem to know about it, and that people think birth control is fine and that it prevents ovulation. And could you just say something about that?
Don't ever be nervous to ask that question. That's a great question. So, yeah, I would love to talk about it. So the first thing I want to say is that a lot of people, particularly people in the pro-life movement, but people everywhere, think that the solution to abortion is more birth control. And I want to just say something about that before I get into that, which you're absolutely right. So Planned Parenthood's own statistics and the Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm of Planned Parenthood, state that 54% of women who have abortions were using a form of birth control when they got pregnant. Okay, did you pick up what I'm putting down? If you look into an abortion clinic waiting area, more than half of the women that are waiting there to get an abortion were using contraception at the time they got pregnant. So the answer to the abortion issue is actually not more birth control, it's actually self-control. But self-control doesn't make money for the abortion industry, so they're not selling that product. In regards to what you're saying, you're absolutely right, and it's not just the hormonal birth control pill, which I'm sure you're aware of. It's any form of hormonal birth control. So the pill, NuvaRing, the patch, the implant in your arm, all the IUDs, including the copper IUD, Paragard, any form of hormonal birth control, including the copper IUD, works in a couple of different ways. The first way that it works is to actually prevent ovulation, so a woman will not release an egg from her ovary. But we know that that fails. Research tells us that that fails about 10% of the time. About 10% of the time, a woman will release an egg from her ovary. And so the backup method to birth control is hormonal birth control, is that the birth control creates a hostile uterine environment, so an inhospitable uterine environment, like you said. And so what happens is that it allows, since an egg is released, it allows the sperm and the egg to come together. It allows conception. And at the moment of conception, what is created? A human life, right? A baby, a new human life is created at that moment. But because of this hostile uterine environment, that new human life is not able to implant on that uterine wall. And so that baby is then flushed out of her womb. And it's essentially an abortion. And that's why these hormonal birth control methods are called abortifacients. So it's kind of like a lot of people would say it was like a passive abortion in some way, because while nobody is going up there with an instrument and they're actually sucking the baby out of the womb, the woman is taking pills, sometimes, many times, unintentionally, because many times women do not know that this is the way that hormonal birth control works. It is on the label. It is on the manufacturing information. You can look it up on the website. I actually have it on my website. I've highlighted it. I've circled it. I have it all in a PDF on my website. If you just go on my website, abbyj.com, and you type in the search bar contraception, a post will come up about it, where I've gone to all of these manufacturers' websites, and I have found where it says this is a method, this is the way that contraception works. This is the backup method to contraception. It actually does eliminate, one of the ways it works is that it eliminates a fertilized egg, a newly conceived human being. A lot of pro-lifers will say, "Oh, you know what? I'm fine with birth control, but I hate Plan B. I hate emergency contraception because emergency contraception, it has the potential to kill a baby." Emergency contraception is birth control. You understand that, right? Emergency contraception, Plan B, levonorgestrel, that is birth control. It's a high dose of birth control. It's the same thing that's in birth control. It's no different. Plan B, emergency contraception, is literally the same exact thing as birth control. It's literally the same exact ingredients as birth control. It's just 4 times the strength. And it works the exact same way. It works to prevent ovulation, but if ovulation has already occurred, then it works to create a hostile uterine environment so that that already conceived baby cannot implant on the uterus. So, I do not mean to say this as an indictment, because I am a woman that used hormonal birth control for 15 years. So I do not mean this as an indictment. I do not mean this as a judgment. But if you are a pro-life person, if you are a person that believes life begins at conception, and that's what pro-lifers say, then you should be compelled to stand against hormonal contraception. To be consistent in your beliefs as a pro-life person, to be consistent in your beliefs as a person who says, I believe that life begins at conception, then you are morally compelled to stand against hormonal contraception.
Hi, I want to say thank you for coming out tonight. It was certainly a sobering speech. But my question, I might be a little bit confused here, or actually 2 questions. First one, you mentioned the abortion methods with forceps and a suction machine. I couldn't tell if those were 2 separate methods or the same method. And my question regarding that was, are they still what's predominantly used?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so good question. So, okay, so there's different types of abortion procedures. Right now, in our country today, actually the most common form of abortion being committed today is actually through pill. And that is what people call chemical abortion, medication abortion, medical abortion, pill abortion. It's all the same. And that's done through taking a series of pills and kills the baby. The woman goes home. She actually expels her baby into a toilet or wherever she is, and then makes the decision to flush her baby down the toilet. That is done up to about 12 weeks gestation legally. Of course, we know women are doing it further along because these pills are now being mailed into women's homes from out of the country. So right now, there's over 70 websites where a woman can go online, type in her medication. She's never seen by a doctor. She never has an ultrasound. She's never seen by any medical professional. This is all done online. She never speaks to a medical professional. She puts in all of her information. She's never required to even provide proof of an ultrasound. She's never required to provide proof of identity. She's never required to provide proof of date of birth or age. And she can put in all of this information. It can be completely fake information. How do I know? I've done it. Just for fun, just to see how far I could get. You know, I said I was 18 years old. I said I had not had an ultrasound. They said that's perfectly fine. You don't have to show proof of ID, nothing. You pay them $110, and they will mail you the abortion pills to any address that you want in the United States. So you could literally be a 12-year-old girl that's 18 weeks pregnant and doing this at home. The abortion pills basically turn any woman's home, dorm room, hotel room into their own abortion facility, at-home abortion facility. That's currently the most common form of abortion today. Now, as far as surgical abortion goes, the surgical abortions are typically done through a D&C abortion procedure, which is a dilation curettage. So it's going to be a suction, and then using some curettes, which are instruments that kind of scrape the side of the uterus. So it's going to be primarily a suction abortion method up through the first trimester. Second trimester abortions up until about, 22 weeks are going to be typically a D&E abortion, which is an abortion method where the baby's too big to fit through a suction tube. Well, primarily the baby's head is too big to fit through a suction tube. So they're going to the doctor, and the baby's body is too rigid. The bones are starting to form. The baby's body is too rigid. So they're going to actually take scalpels, and they're going to take instruments, scissors, and things like that, and they're going to cut the extremities off of the baby. They're going to cut the arms and the legs off of the baby while the baby is still alive. And they're going to pull the pieces of that baby's body parts out. They'll cut arms and legs off, pull those out, and then they'll pull the torso. Most of the time, the head will become separated during that extraction. And then they will go in after that and then suction the remaining tissue, placenta, or whatever is left with that suction. A DNX abortion, or a digoxin-infused abortion, is then reserved for babies that are 22, 23 weeks and above. Currently in the United States, it is legal to abort a baby through all 40 weeks in the pregnancy for any and every reason. So those abortions are done by injecting either through the amniotic sac and the baby drinks the fluid, or more commonly, they will inject directly into the heart an overdose of digoxin. Digoxin is an actual legitimate medication. It's a cardiac medication that cardiac patients use, but they will give an overdose of that medication into the heart of the baby. The baby then will seize and overdose and die in the womb. Then they will do an induction delivery of that dead baby. The other form of abortion, which currently has a federal ban, but we do know that some abortion facilities are still doing this type of abortion, late-term abortion, is a partial birth abortion procedure. This was the most common type of abortion procedure before it was banned. We know there's probably about 100 partial birth abortions being performed every year. And that is a procedure where they actually do a breech extraction. They deliver the baby, they deliver all of the baby except for the baby's head. So they leave the baby's head inside the vaginal canal. They make an incision in the base of the skull and then suction the baby's brain out. And then after the skull is collapsed, they deliver the head. So those are the primary forms of abortion in the United States. But right now, the primary form of abortion is the medication abortion, the pill abortion, which is 4 times more dangerous than a first trimester surgical abortion.
And then my second question was, how should someone who's pro-life navigate the death penalty issue?
The what?
Death penalty issue.
Oh, death penalty? You know, it's 2 completely separate issues. So, I mean, I am, again, as a personal, you know, someone personal, I'm against the death penalty. But the death penalty is not a pro-life issue. So the death penalty is a death penalty issue. There's a lot of people in kind of, they try to lump a bunch of things into the pro-life movement, particularly liberals. They try to make everything a pro-life issue, right? They're like, gun control is a pro-life issue. And especially if there's like a shooting or something that happens, right? They're like, yeah, well, what do you think about this shooting? You're pro-life. And I'm like, well, first of all, I own a ton of guns. Second of all, I've never shot anybody. Third of all, that's a gun issue, right? That's not a pro-life issue. The pro-life movement is laser focused and should be laser focused on ending abortion. And we should not be discredited, and we should not be criticized for that. Nobody is criticizing the Breast Cancer Research Foundation for only working to eradicate breast cancer, right? Nobody's like, hey, Breast Cancer Research Foundation, how come you're not working on a cure for colon cancer too? There's a bunch of different cancers. How come you're only focused on breast cancer? Nobody cares. They're like, great, work on breast cancer, right? That's obviously your issue, because there's also a colon cancer group too, right? And they're focused on colon cancer. And there's a prostate cancer group, and they're focused on prostate cancer. And there's a Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. They're focused on everybody can stay in their lane, and they can focus on what they're best focused on, right? And that's how we win these individual battles. That's how we fight. That's how we best win. When you have a war, if there's a war going on, you're not like, the enemy has got camps set up in 100 different places, so we're going to split up our troops, and there's going to be 2 of each of our troops, and we're going to go attack each one of these camps. No, right? You take your entire army, you take all of your forces, and you start fighting each battle one at a time, right? And that's exactly what we're doing in the pro-life movement. We are right now laser focused on the most harrowing issue that this world has ever seen, and that is abortion. The most tragic issue that we have ever seen of our time, and that's abortion. And that's okay for us to do. And so, while I am personally opposed to the death penalty, there are many pro-life people who are not. And that's okay. That doesn't make them not pro-life, right? They can be pro-life and be laser focused on ending abortion, but they can be pro-death penalty. That doesn't make them not pro-life. So that just makes them pro-death penalty, right? That's okay. And we can, me and that person can debate that at another time, but we can both be adamantly opposed to stopping abortion and stopping the slaughter of innocent babies in the womb. And so that's where we really have to focus. All these people that try to pile everything on the pro-life movement, well, if you were really pro-life, you would be fighting the immigration issue at the border. Well, no, that's an immigration issue, right? If you're really pro-life, you'd be working on a moratorium on the death penalty. Well, no, that's a death penalty issue. If you're really pro-life, you'd be worrying about GMOs. No, that's a GMO issue, right? The more we pile on to our movement, the less strategic we become about ending abortion. And so that's how I answer those issues.
Thank you.
Hi, I just want to once again thank you so much for coming out
Yeah.
and speaking about this. I have a question about an argument that I've heard kind of specifically from the medical community about abortion. and I haven't really heard the pro-life response to it. And it's not really saying that it's the woman's body, like the baby isn't the woman's body, but it's saying that the baby is essentially a parasite on the woman because it's kind of harming the woman, putting them at risk for other issues while not really offering any seen benefits. And that's why it's okay for an abortion to happen. And I was just wondering what your response would be to that.
Yeah, I mean, a parasite is pretty particular. I mean, I've never known of a human parasite. So I think it's I mean, if people in the medical community are saying that, they're really being intellectually dishonest. The people I hear that from are usually like idiots, not people in the medical community. So, I mean, I'm sure there are some because there are also idiots in the medical community. So, but you know, I think scientifically, that's something that we have to go back to. I think particularly if you're talking to somebody in the medical community, I think that we kind of go back to science, right? I mean, is that scientifically accurate? Has a parasite ever had human DNA? No. You know, does it? You know, a human being will always produce another human being, and I think it goes back to the value of human beings. People who believe that there's no benefit to pregnancy are essentially saying there's no benefit to human beings. I find great benefit to all of my children, right? Because I find great benefit to the human race, to creating a bigger human race, right? I find great benefit to procreation. I find great benefit to squishing my baby's cheeks, right? You know, I find great benefit to creating more conservatives. Creating more conservative voters. But I think all of this goes back to really devaluing our culture. And I think we see that particularly, you know, we look at just some of the issues that young people face, like, and we've seen a dramatic increase in this even over the past 10 years, 10, 15 years. We look at, you know, suicide rate in young people, you know, going up. We look at even self-harm, self-mutilation, cutting, things like that. You know, those rates are going up. We look at, you know, drug use among young people, that's going up. And I think all of that goes back to just this devaluation of the self. You know, why wouldn't we harm ourselves if we don't value our own self? And so, you know, it would be easy to look at a baby in the womb and call it a parasite if we don't even value ourselves or humans around us. But I think that you know, if we lead with sort of science, and it's not a betrayal to. I think a lot of Christians think that talking about science with our opponents is kind of a betrayal to our Creator, and it's not, because science comes from our Creator. So it's okay to talk about life from a scientific perspective. It's okay to talk about humans only creating humans. It's okay to talk about life in the womb. It's okay to talk about the fact that a human baby at the moment of conception has human DNA, and it will only ever be human DNA, and it will never turn into a parasite or anything else, right? It's always human, will always be human. So I think that, you know, we just talk about that, but I think that people that bring up those kind of arguments, honestly, there's something deeper going on in here. And so I think a lot of times we can give arguments and we can give facts and we can give science. I think sometimes, though, in those situations, and this has just been my experience, when people start talking about people being parasites, when people start talking about the human race being parasitic, that tells me there's a sickness in their soul. And that tells me there's a sadness in their life. And so all I can do is give them truth and plant seeds of truth. And in that moment, you know, when I leave them or in that moment before I leave them, I make sure that I say a prayer for them. You know, maybe not with them, I don't want to freak them out or whatever, you know, or have them slap me, but I want to pray over them, you know, in that moment, because there's some kind of sadness and sickness in their life if they can actually compare a human being to a parasite. And I'm going to pray over them, and then I'm going to let the Holy Spirit do what the Holy Spirit does with the seeds of truth that I've given them.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, given your extensive history with a lot of people that worked with Planned Parenthood, and that you were betrayed by a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah, they suck, basically.
Yeah.
It's okay.
How do you feel about abortion doctors and workers for Planned Parenthood? Is it more anger, frustration, or pity, or sympathy, and why?
Just the doctors in particular?
Just anyone involved working for Planned Parenthood, working to achieve the missions that they have.
Well, I mean, I have a ministry. So I have a ministry right now called And Then There Were None, and our entire focus is to help these workers leave their jobs in the industry and get them into a job of, you know, that's life-affirming, and to get them to a place, number one, into a relationship with Christ. Number two, get them to a place of wholeness and healing. So, you know, the people that are working there, they're just kind of like, you know, they're workers or people like me, whatever. I do feel sorrow for them. I feel pity for them. A lot of them are very vulnerable. A lot of them are single moms. You know, we talk about the abortion industry really being predatory when it comes to their clients, right? Getting clients in. You know, we talk about, the pro-life movement does a really good job talking about, you know, the fact that 79% of abortion facilities are put in, you know, minority neighborhoods, right? Where 85% of the population in those neighborhoods are minorities. So those are considered super minority neighborhoods. We talk about the fact that Margaret Sanger was you know, the founder of Planned Parenthood was a eugenist, right? And the whole point of Planned Parenthood was to eradicate the African American population with widespread access to abortion and contraception. We do a really good job of talking about that. And even this past year, Planned Parenthood finally, after 50 years of the pro-life movement talking about it and saying it, and them calling us a liar, Planned Parenthood finally, for the first time in 50 years, came out and actually said, you're right. She wasn't racist, sorry, right? They finally admitted what we've been saying for 5 decades, right? We know that. We've been talking about how they're so incredibly predatory on poor people, you know, on the impoverished, on minorities, on these vulnerable communities. What we have not talked about, what we've been talking about in our ministry, is how incredibly predatory they are in their employment practices as well. So the abortion industry intentionally looks for single moms, women who are impoverished, women who are uneducated, undereducated, women who are looking for a way out of a desperate situation. People like me who, you know, were educated, even white educated women, I'm like a unicorn inside of Planned Parenthood. The overwhelming majority of people I worked with were minority, uneducated. The people like me were the ones that get promoted. The people like them stay in, you know, in the day-to-day kind of grunt work of their jobs, but they get paid really well. And they get paid to, you know, to get them hooked on a lifestyle that they would not be able to make at any other job. and they pay them great insurance benefits, and they match their 401k, and they do all these things, right, to get them hooked on a lifestyle. They get them into an apartment that they would not be able to afford working anywhere else that they're actually qualified to work in. And so they get them, hooked into a car payment that they would not be able to afford working anywhere else, like Jack in the Box or McDonald's or somewhere else. By the time that they start seeing, like, oh my gosh, now I'm being required to piece babies back together in a POC lab. I hate this. This is evil. I want to leave. This is awful. I hate what I'm doing. I'm drinking every day before I go to work. Now I'm an alcoholic. I'm smoking weed every day to cope with my job. I'm doing all these self-destructive things, but I've got 3 kids at home, and I'm a single mom. And they're covering insurance for my kids, and I've got a sick kid, and for the first time, my kid's being able to be treated for their chronic health condition. And so I'm willing now to piece babies back together. I'm willing now to be a part of this evil. I'm willing now to actually go to hell in order for my kids to be taken care of. And so they feel very trapped, and the abortion industry does that very, very intentionally. So I do feel pity on them. I do feel sorrow, and that's why we started the ministry that we started. That's why we started, and then there were none, because we have scholarship opportunities for them. We will pay for them to go back to school if they want to go back to school to actually be a nurse, if they want to finish their bachelor's degree, whatever it is they want to do. We actually have a scholarship endowment that will pay for them to do that. We have headhunters. We have we have people that will help them find another job. We have people that will help them with their resume. We will provide transitional financial help for them to leave, because once you realize something's evil, we don't want money to be the reason that you stay and continue to be complicit in that evil. We want you to leave. We want you to flee. The Bible says when you see evil, you don't stay, you don't remain complicit in it, you leave. And so that's why we started, and then there were none. We've had 640 abortion clinic workers leave their jobs, come to a relationship with Christ, and flee from those clinics. So now, that being said, abortionists, doctors are a little bit different. You have some doctors who are sort of in the same position. They're just getting out of med school. They're broke, and they just need a job. The abortion industry pays about $100 per abortion. They can make about $3,000 to $4,000 in a day, and they're just trying to pay off medical school debt, and they just do it for a short amount of time, and then they're like, what the heck am I doing? I gotta get out of here, and they leave, and it's a huge regret of their life, and they end up coming to us and saying, oh my gosh, I need healing. What did I do, right? I have dreams about babies that I killed. I hear crying in my sleep, whatever, right? Then you have abortion doctors like Warren Hearn, abortion doctors like Leroy Carhart, abortion doctors like Curtis Boyd, abortion doctors like Warren Pendergraft. Abortion doctors have been doing this for decades, and they don't do it because they care about women, and they don't even do it for the money. They've been rich for 30 years. They've been rich off of the backs of dead babies for years. They do it not because they care about women. They do it because they like playing God. They do it because they like having the power of life and death in their hands. The abortion industry, the pro-life movement has falsely claimed that abortion is about money for a long time. And they've said, oh, people do it because of money. Oh, the abortion industry, it's all about money, money, money. Let me tell you something. The abortion industry is not about money. That's part of it. But that's not why the abortion industry does what it does. It's not why abortion doctors keep doing what they're doing. The abortion industry does what it does because at the root of abortion, it's a spiritual battle. It's not about money. It's about child sacrifice. That's what this is about. It's about destroying the image of God. That's what abortion is about. And I'm not sure that we really understand that. Abortion is not actually the root of this problem at all. The root of the problem is the destruction of the family. The root of the problem is the destruction of the image of Jesus Christ. Abortion is a symptom of that. all this LGBT movement, all that, that's a symptom of the same core. That's a symptom of the same root. And the only way to break through that sort of sickness, the only way to break through that sort of demonic oppression, because that's what it is through really a breakthrough of the Holy Spirit. That's it. So I think that we need to have a better understanding of really what's going on here. We need to understand that we're not fighting against things like money. You know, we're not fighting against this sort of, flesh and bones sort of, that's not it. You know, this really is a power and principalities sort of issue that we're fighting against, and none of this is new, right? We can look back in the Old Testament, we see child sacrifice. We talk about Baal and Molech and all that. Go back and read that. Go back and read that in Scripture. The Bible says nothing new is under the sun. Nothing new. There is nothing new under the sun. The same thing that happened in the Old Testament is happening today. We just call it something different, right? We call it something more palatable. Child sacrifice is still taking place today inside of abortion clinics every single day across this country. We just call it something more palatable. We call it abortion. We call it termination. We call it abortion pills. We call it reproductive choice. We call it justice. But at the end of the day, it is child sacrifice. It's destruction of the image of Jesus Christ. That's what it is. So for these abortionists that are doing this day in, day out, for the ones that have been doing this, I feel great pity, but I also feel fear for them. Because I know what's coming for them at the end of their life if they don't repent. And I feel great fear for them. And I think that's what, they don't have a fear of the Lord. And I wish they did. Because that's going to be very real for them one day.
This will be our final question.
All right, last question. Go ahead.
So first of all, I just want to start off by thanking you for the work that you're doing in this movement. So a common argument that I hear, or a common response that I hear, is what's your proof for, a baby can feel pain immediately? When does life begin? Where can I find good resources that I can refer people to who are not educated? We know that life begins at conception. We know that a baby can feel pain in the uterus, etc. Where can I refer people to be educated? What are good resources that I can utilize?
Okay, so I would say the Charlotte Lozier Institute is probably the best place to find data on those types of issues. They are a really credible institution. They're a very credible research institution, and they are always looking at those sorts of issues, particularly fetal pain, things like that. And they have probably the most comprehensive database of research on those sorts of topics, on pro-life, research topics that can help us. What I will say, though, is that many times when people on the other side are, giving you those, well, when does life begin? And you give them an answer, and they'll be like, well, yeah, well, when does a baby feel pain? And you're like, well, science says 8 weeks, and they're like, well, yeah, well, when does this? And you're like, oh, well, science says blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, you suck, And, a lot of times I have found when reading through Scripture, anytime Christ, almost every time that Christ was asked a question, he responded with a question. That was probably annoying, but I have found it to be a good lesson, and I found it to be a good teacher when having conversations with people who are questioning me on my pro-life beliefs. When people ask me questions like that, like, when do you think life begins? Sometimes I'm like, well, when do you think life begins? you know, and I'll kind of turn it back around on them, or they'll say, you know, well, what do you think a baby feels pain at, you know, this time? And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, tell me your story about why you support abortion. You know, I'd love to hear it. What I have found is that almost everyone who supports abortion has a story. There's a reason they support abortion. I had a story. Almost every person I know, even men, they have a story. There's a reason. They've had an abortion. They know someone that's had an abortion. They paid for an abortion. They've driven someone to an abortion. Their sister had an abortion. Somebody. Everybody in this room has been touched by abortion, whether they know it or not. 1 in 3 women in our country have had abortions. Everybody in here knows somebody has had an abortion. You may not know who they are, but everybody in here knows somebody has had an abortion. I've had 2, so look, you all know me now. Everybody in here knows somebody has had an abortion. I think as pro-lifers, instead of just constantly debating facts back and forth, which I know not what you want to do, but just in general, like as a universal advice, I think instead of just constantly debating facts back and forth, I think we've got to learn how to really listen to people's experiences and their stories, do that better. Because what I've found in doing this for 14 years and doing a lot of apologetic work and really talking to hundreds of thousands of people, very few times have facts and figures changed minds when I'm talking to someone. But hearing them and listening to them and listening to their experiences, hearing their heart and hearing their pain, that does a lot for someone. And it does a lot to plant seeds in their heart. It may not change their mind right then on the spot, but it gives them something to think about. And it makes them walk away going, man, she wasn't the jerk that I thought she was going to be. You know, just like spouting stuff at me, you know? She was actually kind, and she listened, and she cared. And so I think that goes a long way, just kind of asking questions and finding out, you know, what their beliefs are and where they are in their journey. And so that would sort of be my advice. When, you know, sometimes there is a time for facts and figures, especially if they're giving you facts and figures and you know that's wrong. You kind of be like, well, actually that's not right, and here's the correct thing, and here's where I got that from, you know. But sometimes, man, there's just a lot of hurting people out there, particularly on this issue, because it affects so many. There's just a lot of hurt out there. And a lot of times I see people protesting and stuff, and these women, they're so angry. And I'm like, man, that anger is really hurt. It's hurt down deep in here, but they're so mad, they're so angry, they don't recognize that it's hurt. So we need to help recognize it in them. And we need to see that in them. And we need to be kind, you know, at all times, even when it's hard. Sometimes it's hard. It's hard for me sometimes. But we need to do our best to be kind and not retaliate. So, thank you. Thanks for your question. Thank you guys so much. God bless you.